are we trying to do with fungicides? Protect the plant, yeah. What you could say, well, I've shown you disease, so that's an obvious difference. But what if I said, actually, in most cases, if we want to know whether we're going to get an economic response from a fungicide, the best time to tell is right now, and from this point on. If we're going to create some differences in economics, we need one vital thing to show up. We're trying to retain green leaf area. If you look at this plot here, that's in effect what we're trying to achieve with a fungicide. We're trying to retain green leaf. And in a wheat crop, different parts of the plant contribute different amounts to the final yield. The most important leaves on a wheat crop are likely to be the leaves that are going to be around while you're trying to fill grain. Think of those leaves as being solar panels. That's all they are. They're solar panels. They're capturing the sun's light and then effectively using that light energy to produce complex carbohydrate molecules from really straightforward ingredients like CO2 from the air and water and nutrients coming up. Those solar panels are responsible for the majority of the yield, along with the leaf sheaths, or the stem, if you want to call it the stem, but remember that's the only true part of the stem. The peduncle. Thank you. Thank you. The peduncle. Do not get stem rust on your peduncle. Okay. So, take those top three leaves, this leaf sheath, the other part of the plant that is green is actually the head. So that head itself is, at this stage in the crop's life, producing carbohydrate to fill the head. And I've put some figures in your booklets about this, but I always at this point talk about some pommy guy that came in 2003, I think it was. And this pommy guy talked about leaf contributions, but he used some really dodgy pommy data.
What colour shirt are you wearing?
Well, I think it might have been green, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And he put some information out there and he said, look, show me what the Australian equivalent of this is. Because in the UK, this produces about 45% of your yield. This produces about 20-25% of your yield. This about 7%. And this about 3 or 4%. And the head and the stem combined something like 20-odd%. And as I always say, if you remove the head, it doesn't mean you only lose 20% of your yield. So we're clear on that one. We're talking about the green surface area. But in a way, those three leaves actually give you the targets for what you need to keep disease out of if you're going to make a crop look like that, like that. If you applied lots of fungicide during the tillering stage because you had stripe rust, and you applied that fungicide to the leaves, none of those leaves are present now. So you'd be dependent on that fungicide redistributing itself and actually going into those new leaves Fungicides just can't do that. But early in the growth stage of a plant, there's another way to feed fungicide, and that's not via the leaves, it's via the roots. And that's where you have successful control measures like the in-furrow products that feed from the base outwards. And they can do that because many of these fungicides, and I'll come on to exactly which ones, actually are transported within the plant using the water carrying vessels. Okay? So the early sprays, the early fungicides that you apply in furrow and by seed treatment come out and fill those leaves while those leaves are small. The problem with the in-furrows is that that is a huge structure late on to get a lot of active ingredient to feed up into. But if the weather's going against the disease, it might take you far enough to not have to worry about the late bits of rust that move in, because you've protected it from the base from early on, and then the weather takes care of the disease. Barley. If you want to put fungicide on a wheat crop, finishing that last section, in a drier environment, if I tied your hand behind your back and said you could only apply one fungicide to base, if you were in the high rainfall zone, you might be more tempted with your single spray to wait until you see the tip of the flag leaf coming out. The crop will be well and truly alight by then with stripe rust, but you'll still be putting fungicide primarily on those two top leaves. If I tied your hand behind your back in a mallee scenario, you know that actually you could potentially spray a little earlier. And the reason that you could spray a little earlier is because very often the flag leaf tends not to last as long post flower, and therefore the disease doesn't have as long to rob your green leaf area. And that's why on page 11 I've got those contrasts of if I tied your hand behind your back. So you could look at spraying at growth stage 32, second node, when flag -2 and tip of flag -1 are there, knowing you're not going to put fungicide on the flag, but actually equally knowing that in your environment the weather very often goes against the disease in the second half of the season. And you do not put fungicide on that if you spray at growth stage 30, 31 or 32. That leaf is coming out as we go towards the third node of the crop.